Today I will show you how I selected stocks so I could start with $108,000 in 2017 and end up with almost $282,000 7 years later. So in 2017, I quit my job, decided to work full-time on Dividend Stocks Rock, and I decided to manage my pension account. This is a locked-in retirement account where I cannot add capital, so I started with $108,000, and the only thing I could do is select great companies having dividend growers in it, so the capital gains and the dividend payment could grow the portfolio to an excessive return of 150% in 7 years. Ironically, I did a lot of mistakes throughout those years. I invested in Andrew Peller and Silogist, Algonquin, Lasson Industries, VF Corporation, a long list of failures, but even then, because I followed the exact same strategy I'm about to tell you, with the exact same metrics, my batting average was good enough so the other companies were thriving and lifted my portfolio towards the top. So that's the key here. We're always going to make mistakes as investors, but if you follow a robust investment process, you will be able to select more good stocks than bad ones and eventually achieve your financial goals. So today we're going to take a look at this methodology, which I call the dividend triangle. You might be familiar with it because I did a lot of videos mentioning the dividend triangle, but today we're going to go inside each of those metrics to find what is so important, how to analyze the trend, and I'm going to give you examples of companies with a strong revenue growth, strong earnings per share growth, and of course, a strong dividend growth trend. And at the end of this video, I'm going to provide you with a list with companies with a strong dividend triangle. So let's get started with the first metric, the revenue growth. The importance of selecting companies with a growing revenue is quite obvious. You want to have a business that is thriving, right? That has found ways to improve its sales. A good example of this would be Automatic Data Processing, ticker ADP. So ADP is a leader in payroll services and HR services. What is great about this kind of service is it's recurring, it's super stable, and it's predictable. So therefore, you can see how the revenue trend goes up all the time. Another key point of its business model is it is a sticky business. I've worked for National Bank for 13 years and I always received the same pay stub with the same logo. As an employer myself, it's been 7 years that I hire people and yet still the same payroll services as well. It is incredibly sticky, and that will help ADP to know how fast they could grow year after year moving forward. Another example that is not so perfect, and this is where it's important to analyze the trend, would be Apple. So Apple is also in my portfolio, but as you can see there are moments where there's no growth in revenue. The problem with Apple is it's highly dependent on its next iPhone launch. So it includes a lot of innovation, there's a lot of hype, and it must delivers every single time. As for all the other products and services the company is developing on the side, it's also dependent on innovation. So when you see a revenue trend like this where there are some pauses, you have to identify where the pause is coming from and what's the reason behind it. For Apple, you can see now that this is a company that goes through product cycles. So they will launch a product, there will be a huge revenue trend up, and after that there will be kind of like a pause or a slowdown in growth because people just bought their iPhones, they're not going to buy a second one 6 months later, and then you'll have to wait a little bit more to see the next product cycle to go up. The bet that you're making here is, or the investment thesis is, that Apple will always find another product innovation to push everything forward. The next metric of the dividend triangle is the earnings per share. On top of growing your sales, what I want from a company is also to see that the company is profitable and making more and more money. That kind of makes sense. That's pretty much the definition of a thriving business. The first example I want to show you here is Costco. Costco shows a nearly perfect dividend triangle where every single time that the revenue increases, well, the earnings per share increases pretty much at the same rate. In fact, in the past 5 years, Costco shows a better earnings per share growth than revenue. The good old story where Costco is making its cost by selling its merchandise and then making profit with the membership is a bit simplified, but it's almost true. So it's a good sign to tell you that Costco is able to maintain its margin, actually was able to improve it a little bit over the past 5 years, and that is pushing earnings per share higher all the time. It would be a source of concern if you see that revenue is growing but not the earnings, because it tells you that the company has to spend more to make the same amount of sales or even more sales, but they will be less profitable. In other words, their margin are getting thinner, so it leaves less room for more capital allocation into new projects or, of course, dividend growth. One more thing I like about Costco is that you can see here over the past 10 years of the dividend triangle is it is recession resistant. So by targeting customers that must pay for a membership and that must buy in bulk, well, technically those customers will have a higher salary and will be less affected by recession. And let's be honest, when you go to Costco, you buy a bunch of stuff and you save a lot of money. So it will always help you out during a recession as well. Now moving on to a not so perfect dividend triangle in terms of earnings, National Bank. So National Bank is also in my portfolio, one of my largest holdings, but as a bank, it must deal with economic cycle. So while Costco is recession resistant, National Bank must take provision for credit losses when they see an economic slowdown. So this means they will lower their earnings temporarily to see what's going to happen. So we see that happened around 2016, 2017, and then another time during COVID in 2020, 2021, and once more as interest rate rose not too long ago as the earnings kind of slowed down while the revenue kept going up. Here you have a business model. You see that the company is able to grow their revenue, but from time to time, the earnings are going to slow down. You will have like huge growth period and then some pauses. It's important to understand where the pause is coming from and why it's happening. For a bank, it's kind of normal. Every time that they will see an economic slowdown, the provision for credit loss will put a brake on earnings growth, but it is only temporary. So the key here is to follow the provision for credit losses, the loan book health, and of course, the charge-offs. Now, before we move to the last metric, I want you to download the Rockstar list. The Dividend Rockstar list is a list of companies with thriving metrics. So we're talking about companies that have three things in common. They are growing, they are more profitable, and of course, they are dividend grower. I focused on a stock filter that I created at Dividend Stocks Rock to identify metrics that matters. So a strong dividend triangle looking at the past 5 years for revenue, earnings per share, and dividend growth. The list is updated monthly if you subscribe to the newsletter, so you don't have to do anything. Every single month, you're going to receive a new list with updated numbers. It's the best source of income protection because you're buying thriving businesses, not mature and struggling companies that may eventually slow down their dividend increases or, even worse, cut it off. So the link is in the description below. Go on dividendstocksrock.com/rockstar, enter your email, and you'll be able to download your list right away and start shopping. Now, moving on to the last metric, dividend growth. Perfect example here that I can think of, Fortis, ticker FTS. Like all those companies that I mentioned today are in my portfolio because they all show strong dividend triangle. But Fortis is kind of special. 51 consecutive years of dividend increases, mostly due to its incredibly stable business model. It's a utility company with 99% of its business is regulated. That means that they just have to maintain the grid power, continue to distribute energy, and then increase their rate, deal with the regulators. So makes it a business model quite similar to ADP that we looked at today, where the revenue and earnings are stable, recurring, and highly predictable. And of course, super boring, which is kind of like the perfect setup to a long-term dividend grower. Now moving on to a not so perfect dividend grower, and yet one of my favorite stock, Alimentation Couche-Tard. So as you can see this one, the company grows rapidly, revenue, earnings, but from time to time, they skip a dividend increase. So they will take a pause. That happened not too long ago, about like 5 years ago. And this is usually related because they grow by acquisition. So they are are very mindful of their balance sheet and they're not willing to spend a ton of money on an acquisition and on top of that use more capital or more debt to actually pay a dividend. So they're going to take a pause in the dividend growth rate policy. They're just going to wait for a few years, and after that they're going to resume it with even more generous dividend increases. So it's important in this case, when you see that there's a pause, to understand where the pause is coming from. For Alimentation Couche-Tard, it's not because the company is struggling, but rather they are stellar in their capital allocation. There is a right time to use the capital to make acquisition, another right time to buy back shares, and another right time to increase the dividend. So as you can see, it's not that easy to find companies that will always show a thriving dividend triangle. There are exceptions, there are pauses, there are moments where you have to dig a little bit further to understand where the pause or the slowdown is coming from. However, keep in mind that the trend is your friend. So the trend will tell you what's going on. And usually when I look at the dividend triangle, when the numbers get shaky and when the dividend triangle gets weak, chances are that my investment thesis is not that right and I must let go of the stock. That happened to me not too long ago with Magna International. You can see the dividend triangle here. The revenue and the earnings, especially the earnings, are quite hectic. And after a while, even though I'm still convinced that this is a great company that has a dominant place in deals with most of the big car manufacturers in the world, Inc. EVs deals as well, but yet is not able to maintain great margin, and therefore their earnings are going all over the place. That has an impact on the stock price. It has an impact on their dividend growth rate policy. And for those reasons, I had to let it go. I did not lose money on this one, but seriously, that was definitely not my best investment. So analyzing the trend of the dividend triangle will help me understand if I must keep the company or if I must let it go. So for a quick summary, in an ideal world, you want to have everything that goes up about the same pace. It will show stability of the business model. The relationship between the revenue and the earnings trends will tell you a lot about the margin and the pricing power, and if the company is able to maintain a healthy relationship between its growth and its profit. And of course, the relationship between the earnings growth and the dividend will also tell you if the dividend will continue to increase at the same pace, if it's safe enough, and if the company is thriving. So all right guys, I hope that I've helped you understand a little bit better the dividend triangle. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video to help me spread the good news across the world. I'll see you in the comment. Let me know if you have any companies that you want me to analyze in the future months. And until the next video next Thursday, don't forget to stay invested.